Hi, students first. Actually, the students at Wilson were the first Rochester City School District students to participate in this basically Civil Rights Museum on Wheels. This is a 1957 TDH GMC transit bus, which basically means it is the exact same make and model that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on December the 1st, 1955. Actually, the seat that I'm sitting in was called No Man's Land. This was the actual seat that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. It was a seat reserved for African Americans unless the bus got so full and a white person wanted to sit down. Well, again, on December the 1st, 1955, Rosa refused to give up her seat to a white person and was arrested. What followed was a bus boycott that lasted over a year and ultimately resulted in the integration of Montgomery buses and the integration of bus systems throughout this country. But what a lot of people don't know is that it was a group of women that organized and came up with the idea of the bus boycott. Now, I'm assuming you all know about the Montgomery bus boycott that lasted just over a year. It basically brought to a standstill the officials in Montgomery because basically black people, domestic workers and so forth, provided the dimes that went into the coin machine that allowed the bus company to thrive. And with black people boycotting the bus system, it was very difficult for that system to survive. But a lot of people think that Martin Luther King came up with the idea for the bus boycott. He did not. Actually, it was a group of women called the Women's Political Action Committee. They were a bunch of responsible professional people who had had enough. Quite frankly, Rosa was not the first person to be arrested on the Montgomery bus boycott, in the Montgomery bus system. Many people had been arrested before her. And these women had basically had enough. So one day, without their employers knowing, they went into this local college and mimeographed, which was an earlier form of a Xerox machine, 36,000 flyers. Now we're fortunate to have Martin Luther King's book, Stride Towards Freedom. This is an actual first edition printing of Martin Luther King's book. And in this book, Martin Luther King described the Montgomery bus boycott. He is humble enough to give credit to these women, and he actually copied what that actual memo, that poster said to the people on December the 2nd, 1955. And I want to read to you that flyer. It said, "Don't ride the bus to work, to town, to school, or any other place on Monday, December the 5th, 1955. Another Negro woman has been arrested and put in jail because she refused to give up her bus seat. Don't ride the buses to work, to town, to school, or anywhere on Monday. If you work, take a cab, or share a ride, or walk. Come to a mass meeting Monday at 7 p.m. at the Holt Street Baptist Church for further instructions." It was at that meeting at Holt Street Baptist Church that a 26-year-old preacher who nobody knew at the time was elected president of the Montgomery Improvement Association. They took over the bus boycott from this Women's Political Action Committee. Now the bus boycott would last about a little bit over a year, 365 days. And it would ultimately produce the success that they were looking for, which is the buses in Montgomery were integrated. It didn't just happen because of the bus boycott. The Supreme Court of the United States said that it was unconstitutional for local bus companies to say black people and white people could not ride the bus together. But on the initial days of the bus boycott, that success was not clear. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And Martin Luther King, on page 53 of his book, Stride Towards Freedom, discusses how he was feeling on the very first morning of the bus boycott, which was December the 5th, 1955. I'm going to read for you a portion of his thoughts. "My wife and I awoke earlier than usual on Monday morning. We were up and fully dressed by 5:30. The day for the protest had arrived, and we were determined to see this drama unfold. I was still saying that if we could get just 60% cooperation, this venture would be a success. Fortunately, a bus stop was just 5 feet from our house. This meant we could observe the opening stages from our own front window. The first bus was to pass around 6 o'clock in the morning, and so we waited, and waited, and waited. I was in the kitchen drinking my coffee when I heard Coretta cry out, 'Martin, Martin, come quickly!' I put down my cup of coffee and ran towards the living room. As I approached the front window, Coretta pointed joyfully to a slow-moving bus. Darling, darling, the bus, it's empty. I could hardly believe what I saw. I knew the South Jackson line, which ran past our home, carried more Negro passengers than any other line in Montgomery, and that this first bus was usually filled with domestic workers going to their jobs. Would all the other buses follow that pattern that had been set by the first? I wondered. Eagerly, we waited for the next bus. In 15 minutes, it rolled down the street, and like the first, it was empty. A third bus appeared, and it too was empty. It just had 2 white passengers. I jumped in my car, and for almost an hour, I cruised every major street and examined every passing bus. During this hour, at the peak of morning traffic, I saw no more than 8 Negro passengers riding the buses. By this time, I was jubilant. Instead of just 60% cooperation that we had hoped for, it was becoming apparent that we had reached almost 100% cooperation. A miracle had taken place. The once dormant and quiet Negro community was now fully awakened. Martin Luther King Stride Towards Freedom. Now, I bought this bus so that folks could appreciate the rich and wonderful civil rights history that is in the United States. The bus happens to have a timeline of significant events in civil rights history, beginning with Brown versus Board of Education, where Thurgood Marshall, then an attorney for the NAACP, brought to the Supreme Court of the United States a decision that would basically integrate schools. And the timeline ends in 1964, nearly 10 years later, with President Lyndon Baines Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. People need to understand that civil rights history is as much African American history as it is American history. And that as part of American history, we sometimes find reasons to exclude or oppress various groups: Irish, Catholic, Jewish, Native American, Japanese, African American women. And so we find that civil rights history is a history that protects people of color, but also women, Jews, Asians, all different ethnicities. And so the Civil Rights Museum on Wheels allows people to have appreciation for that history, because that's the very history that will protect them in the future. I'm glad you were here to see it first at Student First.